The afternoon sun was starting to dip lower in the sky when David Thompson pulled his car into the parking lot of Miller's Coffee House. It had been one of those long, exhausting days filled with back-to-back meetings at City Hall. His suit jacket was tossed in the back seat, his tie loosened, and all he wanted was a strong cup of coffee before heading home to his family. David had only been in his new position for 2 weeks. The promotion had been a huge deal, covered by all the local news stations and newspapers. But today, dressed in casual clothes and driving his personal vehicle, he looked like any other guy stopping for coffee on a Thursday afternoon. He stepped out of his car and stretched his shoulders, feeling the tension from sitting in meetings all day. The coffee shop was one of his favorites, a small local place that made the best vanilla latte in town. He'd been coming here for years, long before his recent promotion. As David walked toward the entrance, he noticed a police cruiser parked near the street. He didn't think much of it. Officers stopped for coffee all the time. He'd done it himself countless times throughout his career. But then he heard footsteps behind him, quick and purposeful. "Hey you, stop right there." David turned around to see a uniformed officer approaching him with a stern expression. The officer was white, maybe in his mid-30s, with a stocky build and arms crossed over his chest. His name tag read Hutchins. "Good afternoon, officer," David said politely. "Is there a problem?" Officer Hutchins looked him up and down with obvious suspicion. "I'm going to need to ask you some questions." "What are you doing here?" David blinked, slightly confused. "I'm just getting coffee. The shop is right here." "Uh-huh," Hutchins said, not sounding convinced at all. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. I need to see some identification." David felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. He'd experienced this before in his life, more times than he cared to count, but it never got easier. Still, he kept his voice calm and steady. "Officer, I'm just a customer. I've been coming to this coffee shop for years." "That's not what I asked you," Hutchins snapped back. "I asked for identification." "You got ID or not?" A few people walking nearby started to slow down, sensing the tension in the air. David noticed an elderly woman clutching her purse a little tighter as she passed, throwing him a wary glance. "I have identification," David said slowly, "but I'd like to know why you're questioning me. I haven't done anything wrong." Hutchins stepped closer, his hand resting on his belt near his radio. "Listen, buddy, I don't have time for this. You either cooperate or we're going to have a problem. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. What are you doing in this area?" David took a deep breath. His training kicked in. All those years of learning how to de-escalate situations, how to read people, how to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. This time, he was on the receiving end. "Like I said, I'm getting coffee. I work nearby and I stopped here on my way home." "Where do you work?" Hutchins demanded. "At City Hall." The officer let out a short, mocking laugh. "City Hall? Doing what exactly?" "Janitorial work." The comment stung, but David kept his composure. "I work in administration." "Right," Hutchins said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "And I'm supposed to just take your word for it? How about you put your hands on the vehicle and let me make sure you're not carrying anything you shouldn't be?" "Excuse me?" David's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. "I haven't done anything to warrant a search." "I'll determine what warrants what," Hutchins shot back. "I've got 8 years on this force and I know trouble when I see it. Now, are you going to comply or do I need to call for backup?" David's mind was racing. He knew his rights. He'd spent his entire career upholding them, teaching them, defending them. But he also knew that this situation could spiral out of control quickly if he wasn't careful. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and things could get dangerous. "I'm not resisting," David said clearly, making sure anyone watching could hear. "But I'm telling you I have done nothing wrong. I'm a paying customer trying to buy coffee." "Yeah, well, I've heard that before," Hutchins muttered. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need backup at Miller's Coffee House. I've got an individual refusing to cooperate." "I never said I was refusing," David interjected, but Hutchins waved him off. More people were stopping now. A young couple with a baby stroller paused on the sidewalk. A teenager sitting on a nearby bench pulled out his phone. David could see the red recording light blinking. "Officer, please," David tried again. "This is a misunderstanding. If you just let me explain—" "Save it," Hutchins interrupted. "I've dealt with guys like you before. Always got some story, always trying to talk your way out of things. Guys like me," David repeated quietly. The implication was clear, and it hung in the air between them. Hutchins seemed to realize what he'd said and quickly added, "Suspicious individuals. That's what I meant. People acting suspicious in areas where they don't belong." "And what makes you think I don't belong here?" David asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd known it from the moment Hutchins approached him. Before the officer could respond, another police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Hutchins seemed satisfied, a slight smirk crossing his face. "Good, backup's here. Now maybe you'll take this seriously." A younger officer, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, stepped out of the vehicle. She looked at the scene, at David standing calmly with his hands visible, at Hutchins with his aggressive posture, at the growing crowd of onlookers. David caught her eye for just a moment. He saw something there, a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even discomfort. But she was the junior officer, and Hutchins was clearly taking the lead. "What have we got?" she asked, approaching carefully. "Suspicious individual," Hutchins said, refusing to provide adequate identification and explanation for his presence. "That's not accurate," David said firmly but respectfully. "I've explained several times that I'm here to buy coffee. I work at City Hall, and this is a regular stop for me." The female officer, whose name tag read Chen, looked between them. "Sir, do you have ID you can show us?" "I do," David said. "But I'd like to understand why I'm being detained for trying to buy coffee." Hutchins stepped forward again. "Nobody said you're detained. But if you keep up with this attitude, that's exactly what's going to happen." The situation was escalating, and David knew it. Everything he'd ever taught about community policing, about respect and dignity, about treating people as individuals rather than stereotypes, was being violated right in front of him. And there was nothing he could do about it without potentially making things worse. The coffee he'd wanted seemed very far away now. All he could think about was how many other people had stood exactly where he was standing, facing exactly what he was facing, with no badge to eventually reveal, no position to fall back on, no protection except their dignity and the hope that justice would prevail. And in that moment, David understood his new job in a way he never had before. The parking lot was no longer quiet. What had started as a simple coffee run had turned into a spectacle, and David could feel dozens of eyes watching his every move. The teenager with the phone had moved closer, clearly recording everything. An older man stood by his truck, shaking his head in disapproval, though David wasn't sure if it was directed at him or at the officers. Officer Hutchins seemed energized by the arrival of his fellow officer. "Chen," he turned to her with a confident expression, like a teacher about to demonstrate something to a student. "I spotted this individual acting suspicious in the parking lot," Hutchins explained. "When I approached to question him, he became evasive and refused to properly identify himself." David felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "That's not what happened. I answered every question you asked. I told you I was here for coffee. See what I mean?" Hutchins said to Chen, gesturing toward David. Argumentative, trying to create a narrative. Chen shifted uncomfortably. She was young, probably fresh out of the academy, and David could see the confusion in her eyes. She looked at David again, really looked at him, and seemed to be struggling with something. "Sir," she said, her voice more gentle than Hutchins's, "if you could just show us your ID, we can clear this up quickly." David nodded slowly. "I can do that. But I want to be clear that I'm doing this voluntarily, not because I've done anything wrong." Yeah, Hutchins muttered. Everyone's a lawyer these days. As David reached for his wallet, Hutchins barked out, "Slow movements. Keep your hands where I can see them." The sharpness of the command made several bystanders gasp. David froze, his hand halfway to his back pocket. His heart was pounding now, not from fear of the officers, but from the weight of what was happening. He'd been in this job long enough to know how quickly things could go wrong, how a simple misunderstanding could turn tragic. "I'm just getting my wallet," David said clearly, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "It's in my back right pocket." "I'm moving slowly." He pulled out his wallet with deliberate, visible movements. But before he could open it, Hutchins stepped forward and snatched it from his hand. "I'll handle that," the officer said. David's patience was wearing thin, but he maintained his composure. "That's my personal property." "And I'm conducting an investigation," Hutchins shot back. He flipped open the wallet and started going through it. Credit cards, a few family photos, receipts. He pulled out David's driver's license and studied it. "David Thompson," Hutchins read aloud. "Address is in the north side. That's a pretty nice neighborhood. How's a guy like you afford a place like that? The question hung in the air like a slap. Chen's eyes widened slightly, and she glanced at Hutchins with what looked like concern. I work for a living, David replied, his voice tight. Like most people. Doing what exactly? Hutchins pressed. You said something about City Hall? That's right. What department? David paused. He could tell them right now. 3 words would end this entire humiliating ordeal, but something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the principle of the thing. Maybe it was the need to see just how far this would go. Maybe it was because he knew that most people in his position wouldn't have a title to save them. I work in the main administrative building, David said. Hutchins laughed, a harsh sound that made David's stomach turn. Let me guess. You're someone important? Maybe you're the mayor's assistant? Or wait, maybe you're the governor? The mockery in his voice was unmistakable. A woman in the growing crowd called out, "Leave him alone! He hasn't done anything." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back," Hutchins called over his shoulder. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us when we see someone being treated like this," another voice shouted. Hutchins's face reddened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by civilians. He turned back to David with renewed aggression. "You know what? I think we need to take a ride down to the station. Sort this all out there." "On what grounds?" David asked. "You have no legal reason to detain me." "I've got plenty of reason," Hutchins snapped. "Suspicious behavior, failure to cooperate, creating a public disturbance." "I've cooperated with everything," David said, his voice rising slightly despite his best efforts. "And the only disturbance here is the one you created by harassing an innocent person." Chen finally spoke up. "Officer Hutchins, maybe we should—" "Not now, Chen," Hutchins cut her off. "I'm the senior officer here. I make the calls," but Chen wasn't backing down completely. She stepped closer to David and in a quieter voice asked, "Sir, is there someone we can call? Someone who can verify your employment?" It was a lifeline, an attempt to de-escalate from the inside, and David recognized it for what it was. This young officer had good instincts. She knew something wasn't right about this situation. "Yes," David said. "You can call Sergeant Patricia Reynolds. She works the day shift. She can verify who I am." Hutchins rolled his eyes. "Oh, now you're name-dropping sergeants? You really expect me to believe you know Sergeant Reynolds?" "I do know her," David said calmly. "Call her. Right now." Something in David's tone must have gotten through because Hutchins hesitated. Chen pulled out her radio, but Hutchins held up his hand. "Wait, I want to hear more about this. How exactly do you know Sergeant Reynolds?" "We work together," David said. "Doing what?" "Cleaning the station?" The crowd was getting louder now, voices overlapping in protest. David could hear snippets of angry comments directed at Hutchins. Someone was yelling about racial profiling. Another person was threatening to call the news. Hutchins was starting to look cornered, which made him more dangerous. David had seen it happen before. Officers who dug themselves into holes and then lashed out rather than admit they were wrong. "You're really pushing it, friend," Hutchins said, stepping into David's personal space. "I've about had it with your attitude. You think you're better than me? You think you can just talk back to a police officer?" "I think I deserve the same respect you'd show anyone else," David replied. "That's all I've ever asked for. Respect?" Hutchins laughed bitterly. "You want respect? Then show some. Stop acting like you're a victim here." "I am a victim," David said quietly. "A victim of assumptions. A victim of prejudice. A victim of being judged before you even spoke to me." The words seemed to strike something because Hutchins's expression darkened. "You're calling me prejudiced?" "That's it. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Officer Hutchins." Chen's voice was sharp now, urgent. "We need to call this in. We need to verify his information." "I don't need to verify anything," Hutchins said. "I know trouble when I see it." He reached for his handcuffs and the crowd erupted. People were shouting now, pulling out phones, demanding badge numbers. David remained still, his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. But inside his mind was working. This was wrong on every level. This was everything he'd spent his career fighting against. This was the exact behavior that destroyed trust between police and communities, that created divisions, that led to tragedy, and he was powerless to stop it. Chen stepped between them suddenly, her small frame blocking Hutchins's path to David. "Sir, I really think we should call the sergeant. Protocol states, I don't need a rookie telling me about protocol." Hutchins shouted, Then let me tell you about it. The new voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Everyone froze. David turned to see a third police cruiser pulling up, and from it stepped Sergeant Patricia Reynolds. She was a veteran with 20 years on the force, a tough, no-nonsense woman who commanded respect wherever she went. And from the look on her face, she was not happy at all. Sergeant Patricia Reynolds had been a cop for 20 years, and in that time she'd seen just about everything. Domestic disputes, armed robberies, high-speed chases, and everything in between. But as she stepped out of her cruiser and surveyed the scene at Miller's Coffee House, she felt her blood run cold. She recognized David immediately. How could she not? 2 weeks ago, she'd stood in the press room at City Hall, along with dozens of other officers watching as he was officially introduced to the public. She'd even shaken his hand afterward, told him she looked forward to working under his leadership. And now here he was, surrounded by officers, with a crowd of angry civilians recording every second. What in the world is going on here? Reynolds demanded, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Hutchins turned, looking relieved to see a superior officer. Sergeant Reynolds, glad you're here. I've got a situation with this individual. He's been uncooperative and— Hutchins, be quiet for a second, Reynolds interrupted. She looked directly at David and their eyes met. She could see the exhaustion there, the frustration, but also the dignity. He hadn't lost his composure, even in this mess. Sir, she said, her voice formal but respectful. Are you all right? I'm fine, Sergeant, David replied. Just trying to get coffee. Reynolds closed her eyes briefly as if gathering strength. Then she turned to Hutchins with an expression that could freeze fire. Step over here, now. Hutchins followed her a few feet away, but not far enough that David couldn't hear. Reynolds kept her voice low but firm. Do you know who that is? She asked. Hutchins shrugged. Some guy claiming to work at City Hall. He's been giving me attitude since I approached him. You approached him? Reynolds repeated. For what reason? Suspicious behavior, Hutchins said defensively. He was loitering in the parking lot. Loitering? Reynolds' voice rose slightly. He's standing in front of a coffee shop, Hutchins. That's called being a customer. Look, I know how to do my job, Hutchins said, his jaw tight. I've been doing this for 8 years. I saw something that didn't look right and I investigated. That's what we're supposed to do. Reynolds shook her head slowly. What exactly didn't look right? A man in casual clothes walking toward a coffee shop? What about that seemed suspicious to you? Hutchins hesitated, and in that hesitation, the truth hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. I was doing my job, he repeated, but with less conviction. Your job is to protect and serve, Reynolds said, not to harass innocent people based on your assumptions. I didn't harass anyone, Hutchins protested, his voice rising. Why is everyone acting like I'm the bad guy here? I followed procedure. I asked questions. He refused to cooperate. He refused? Reynolds turned to look at David, then back at Hutchins. From what I can see, he's been standing there calmly this entire time. Meanwhile, you've got a crowd of people recording you, and backup had to be called for a man buying coffee. Does that sound like proper procedure to you? Chen, who had been standing awkwardly to the side, spoke up quietly. Sergeant, I suggested calling you earlier to verify his information. Officer Hutchins was hesitant. Reynolds gave Chen a brief nod of acknowledgement before turning back to Hutchins. You were hesitant to verify why? If he said he knew me, if he said he worked at City Hall, why wouldn't you make one simple phone call? Because people lie! Hutchins exploded. They lie all the time. They make up stories, they name drop, they try to get out of trouble by pretending to be someone they're not. And what trouble was he in? Reynolds demanded. What crime had he committed? What law had he broken? Hutchins opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence was damning. Reynolds took a deep breath. Hutchins, I need you to go back to the station. Right now. What? You're not serious. Dead serious. Get in your cruiser and return to the station. We'll discuss this there. You can't be taking his side over mine, Hutchins said, disbelief and anger mixing in his voice. I'm one of your officers. And that's exactly why this is so disappointing, Reynolds said quietly. Now go. That's an order. Hutchins looked like he wanted to argue more, but the finality in Reynolds's tone stopped him. He glanced back at David one more time, and there was something ugly in his expression, a mixture of resentment and embarrassment. Fine, he spat, but I was just doing my job. When this blows over, everyone will see that. He stormed off to his cruiser, and the crowd parted to let him through. Some people booed as he drove away. Others clapped. Reynolds turned to David, and for the first time she let her professional mask slip slightly. There was genuine regret in her eyes. "Chief Thompson," she said, and at those words the entire crowd seemed to inhale sharply. Chen's face went pale. The teenager with the phone nearly dropped it. The people who had been watching gasped and murmured to each other. "I apologize," Reynolds continued. "This should never have happened." David nodded slowly. "It shouldn't have, but it did. I don't know what to say except, don't apologize to me because of my title." David interrupted gently. "Apologize because it was wrong. Apologize because if I were actually just a regular guy getting coffee, it still would have been wrong." Reynolds stood straighter. "You're right. You're absolutely right, sir. And I am sorry. This is not what we're supposed to be." The crowd was still buzzing with the revelation. People were whispering, "He's the police chief?" And oh my God, that cop had no idea. David looked around at all the faces, all the phones still recording. This moment would be online within the hour. It would be on the news by evening. His face, his humiliation, his experience would be public knowledge. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. "Sergeant Reynolds," David said, "I want copies of any video footage from this incident. Body cameras, dash cams, everything?" "Yes, sir. I'll personally ensure it's collected and delivered." David turned to the crowd. "I want to thank those of you who spoke up, who recorded this, who refused to just walk away. That takes courage, and it matters more than you know." An older black man in the crowd called out, "Chief, this happened to you. It happens to all of us. We see you, brother. We appreciate you." Several people nodded and voiced their agreement. A young woman wiped tears from her eyes. David felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been in this position, everyone who'd been judged before they were known, everyone who'd been seen as suspicious for simply existing in a space. Chen approached hesitantly. "Chief Thompson, I should have done more. I should have insisted we call the sergeant right away." David looked at the young officer. She was barely older than his own daughter, fresh-faced, probably full of idealism when she graduated the academy, and now confronting the ugly reality of what her profession sometimes looked like. "You tried," David said. "I saw you try. That counts for something, does it?" Chen asked quietly. "Because it didn't stop what happened." "No, it didn't," David agreed. "But it shows me that not everyone thinks like Officer Hutchins. It shows me that there are people on the force who still have the right instincts. Don't lose that, Officer Chen. Don't let this job harden you to the point where you stop questioning things that don't feel right." Chen nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. "I won't, sir. I promise." Reynolds cleared her throat. "Chief, would you like an escort home? Or to the station?" "We can make sure—" "I'd like my coffee," David said simply. "That's what I came here for." He turned and walked toward the coffee shop entrance. The crowd parted respectfully, and a few people patted his shoulder as he passed. The teenager with the phone said, "That was really brave, man. What you did back there." David paused. "I didn't do anything brave. I just refused to be made small." "There's a difference." Inside the coffee shop, the barista, a young woman with purple hair and worried eyes, immediately came to the counter. "Sir, I am so sorry about what happened outside. Your coffee is on the house. Anything you want." "That's kind of you," David said. "I'll have my usual. Large vanilla latte? Extra shot." As she made his drink, her hand shaking slightly, David looked out the window at the parking lot. The crowd was dispersing slowly, people still talking in small groups. Reynolds was speaking to Chen, probably debriefing the incident. Squad cars were leaving, their lights off, the emergency over. But David knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see dozens of missed calls and text messages. The mayor's office, the city council, local news stations. Word was already spreading. The barista handed him his coffee with an apologetic smile. David thanked her and took a sip. It was perfect, just like always. He walked back outside into the late afternoon sun, and Reynolds immediately came over. "Chief, the media is already calling." "The mayor's office has been trying to reach you." "I know," David said. "I saw. What do you want me to tell them?" David thought for a moment, sipping his coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him. "Tell them the truth," he finally said. "Tell them exactly what happened. No cover-ups. No spinning. Just the truth." Reynolds nodded. And Hutchins? David's expression hardened slightly. By the book investigation. I want everything documented. Every word, every action, every decision. This is going to be handled properly with full transparency. Understood, sir. As David walked to his car, he could feel the weight of what came next settling on him. This incident would define his early days as chief. How he handled it would set the tone for his entire tenure. He got in his car, placed his coffee in the cup holder, and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. The next morning, David arrived at the police station at 6 a.m. earlier than usual. He'd barely slept. The incident at the coffee shop played on repeat in his mind, mixed with phone calls from the mayor, the city council, and what seemed like every news outlet in the state. His wife, Angela, had held him the night before as he processed what happened. She'd seen the videos online. Everyone had. Within hours, they'd gone viral. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. His face, his humiliation broadcast to the world. They're calling you brave, Angela had said, showing him her phone. People are saying you handled it with dignity. I don't feel brave, David had admitted. I feel tired. Now, walking through the familiar halls of the station, he felt the eyes of every officer on him. Some looked away quickly. Others met his gaze with respect or sympathy. A few nodded in acknowledgement. Reynolds was waiting in his office along with Captain James Morrison, the head of internal affairs. They both stood when he entered. Chief, Morrison said, I've been reviewing all available footage from yesterday. Body cameras, dash cams, and civilian recordings. I've also begun interviewing witnesses. And? David asked, settling into his chair. Morrison exchanged a glance with Reynolds before continuing. It's not good for Officer Hutchins. Every angle shows the same thing. You were calm, cooperative, and respectful throughout. Hutchins was aggressive, dismissive, and according to multiple witnesses, made several inappropriate comments. David nodded slowly. What's Hutchins saying? He's claiming he followed proper procedure. Says he had reasonable suspicion to approach you, that you were evasive, and that he felt threatened by the growing crowd. Threatened? David repeated. By people with cell phones? His words, not mine, Morrison said. His union rep is already involved. They're preparing a defense based on officer safety and judgment calls made in the field. Reynolds spoke up. Chief, there's something else. This isn't the first time Hutchins has had complaints. I pulled his file this morning. In the past 3 years, he's had 7 citizen complaints. 4 were about excessive force, 3 about unprofessional conduct. And what happened with those complaints? David asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. 6 were dismissed for lack of evidence. 1 resulted in a verbal warning. David leaned back in his chair, frustration building. 7 complaints and nothing happened. The union is strong, Morrison said carefully. And to be fair, not all complaints are legitimate. But looking at the pattern, at the details, there's cause for concern. Cause for concern? David's voice rose slightly. Captain, this man profiled me in a parking lot. He assumed I was a criminal based on nothing more than how I looked. He mocked me, dismissed my explanations, and was about to arrest me for the crime of buying coffee. And you're telling me this isn't the first time he's behaved this way? No, sir, it's not, Morrison admitted. And I take full responsibility for not recognizing the pattern sooner. David stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. Officers were arriving for their shifts, going about their morning routines, unaware that their chief was about to make a decision that would shake the entire department. I want a full investigation, David said finally. Not just of yesterday's incident, but of all 7 previous complaints. I want every detail re-examined. Chief, the union will fight that, Reynolds warned. They'll say we're targeting Hutchins unfairly. Let them fight it, David said. I'm not targeting anyone. I'm doing what should have been done years ago. If those complaints were legitimate and were swept under the rug, that's on us. That's on this department. And it stops now. Morrison made notes on his tablet. What about Hutchins's current status? He's suspended with pay pending the investigation. That's fine for now, David said. But I want daily updates. And I want this investigation completed within 2 weeks. No dragging it out, no delays. Yes, sir. There was a knock on the door and David's assistant, Mrs. Rodriguez, poked her head in. Chief, the mayor is on line 1. And there are about 20 news crews setting up outside. David sighed. Tell the mayor I'll call him back in 10 minutes. And schedule a press conference for this afternoon. 2 o'clock. A press conference? Reynolds asked. Chief, are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe we should wait until the investigation is further along. No, David said firmly. This is already public. The videos are everywhere. If I don't address it directly, someone else will control the narrative, and I won't let that happen. After Morrison and Reynolds left, David sat alone in his office, gathering his thoughts. His phone buzzed constantly. Text messages poured in from friends, family, colleagues from other departments across the country. Everyone had seen the videos. Everyone had an opinion. One message stood out. It was from his father, a retired officer who'd served for 30 years. Son, I'm proud of you, not because you're the chief, but because you never forgot who you are. Don't let them make you bitter. Use this to make change. Love, Dad. David stared at those words for a long moment. Don't let them make you bitter. Easier said than done. But his father was right. Bitterness wouldn't help anyone. Change would. At 2 o'clock, David stood behind a podium in the station's press room. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and microphones. He could see the live stream counters on the news cameras ticking up rapidly. Thousands of people were watching in real time. He cleared his throat and began. Yesterday afternoon, I stopped at a local coffee shop to get coffee before heading home. What should have been a routine, uneventful moment turned into something very different. As you've all seen by now, I was approached by one of our officers, questioned, and treated as a suspect, despite having committed no crime and exhibiting no suspicious behavior. The room was silent except for the clicking of cameras. I'm not here to condemn Officer Hutchins personally, but I am here to condemn the behavior, the assumptions, and the treatment I received. Because here's the truth. What happened to me happens to people in our community every single day. The only difference is that I have a badge and a title that eventually protected me. Most people don't have that protection. He paused, letting that sink in. If this can happen to me, the chief of police, imagine how vulnerable regular citizens feel. Imagine the students, the workers, the parents, the grandparents who are judged before they're known, who are seen as threats before they're seen as human beings. A reporter called out, Chief Thompson, will Officer Hutchins be fired? There's an active investigation underway. I won't comment on potential outcomes until that investigation is complete. But I will say this. We will follow the evidence wherever it leads, and we will take appropriate action based on the findings. Another reporter. Do you believe you were racially profiled? David met the camera directly. I believe I was approached based on assumptions rather than facts. Whether those assumptions were racially motivated is something the investigation will explore. But let's be honest about what we all saw on those videos. Make your own conclusions. What message do you have for the community? David gripped the podium. I want you to know that I see you. I hear you. And I promise you that this department will change. Not overnight, but steadily and meaningfully. We're going to review our training protocols, our stop and question procedures, and our complaint investigation process. We're going to implement mandatory bias training for every officer, including myself. We're going to create a civilian review board with real authority, and we're going to rebuild the trust that incidents like yesterday damage. How can you guarantee change? I can't guarantee anything, David admitted. But I can promise effort, transparency, and accountability. That's what leadership means. Not perfection, but constant improvement and a willingness to admit when we've failed. After the press conference, David returned to his office to find Officer Chen waiting nervously outside. Chief Thompson, do you have a moment? Of course, Officer Chen, come in. She sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I wanted to apologize again for yesterday. I should have done more. You did what you could in a difficult situation, David said gently. You're a junior officer. Hutchins outranked you. Going against him took courage, and it didn't feel like courage. It felt like I was watching something wrong happen and couldn't stop it. David leaned forward. Chen, can I ask you something? Why did you become a cop? She looked surprised by the question. My father was an officer. He always talked about helping people, making a difference. I wanted to do the same. Do you still want that? Yes, she said immediately. More than ever, actually. Yesterday showed me exactly why it matters. David nodded. Good. Because the department needs officers like you. Officers who question things, who feel uncomfortable when something isn't right. Don't lose that instinct. Let it guide you, but what if I'm wrong? What if I question something and I'm the one who's out of line? Then you learn and adjust. But Chen, here's what I've learned in my career. The officers who never question anything are the ones who end up in situations like yesterday. The ones who think they're always right, who never examine their own biases, who rely on assumptions instead of evidence. Don't be that officer. Chen stood looking more confident than when she'd entered. Thank you, Chief, I won't. As evening fell, David finally left the station. The parking lot was nearly empty. His car sat under a streetlight, and for a moment he just stood there, remembering how 24 hours ago he'd pulled into a different parking lot with nothing more on his mind than getting coffee. His phone rang. It was the mayor. David, I watched your press conference. Bold move. Had to be done. The city council wants a meeting next week. They have concerns about the fallout, about the department's image. Tell them I'm more concerned about the department's reality than its image, David said. Image is what got us here. Reality is what's going to get us out. There was a pause. You know this won't be easy. Change never is, I know, but neither is being treated like a criminal for buying coffee. When David finally got home, Angela met him at the door with a hug that lasted a long time. His kids, teenagers now, gathered around wanting to talk about what happened, about the videos, about what it meant. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, David sat in his study, thinking about tomorrow. About the investigation, about Hutchins, who was probably at home right now, angry and defensive, about Chen, who was learning what it meant to have integrity in a compromised system, about all the officers who were waiting to see what kind of chief he would really be. He thought about his father's message. Don't let them make you bitter. He wouldn't. But he wouldn't let them make him soft either. Tomorrow, the real work began. 3 months had passed since that afternoon at Miller's coffee house, and the city looked different somehow. Or maybe David just saw it differently now. The investigation into Officer Hutchins had concluded after 2 intense weeks of interviews, evidence review, and testimony. The findings were damning, not just about the coffee shop incident, but about years of similar behavior that had been overlooked, minimized, or explained away. Hutchins had resigned before formal disciplinary action could be taken, his departure negotiated by the union to avoid a termination on his record. Some people said David had gone too easy on him. Others said he'd been too harsh. David knew he'd done what the evidence required, nothing more, nothing less, but Hutchins was just one officer. The real work had been transforming an entire department. David sat in the community center on a Tuesday evening, surrounded by about 50 residents from various neighborhoods. This was the 4th town hall meeting he'd held since the incident, each one packed with people who had stories to share, questions to ask, and anger to express. An elderly woman stood up, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the microphone. Chief Thompson, my grandson was stopped 3 times last month. 3 times just walking home from work. Each time, the officers said he matched a description. But the only description he matches is being a young black man. When does it stop? David met her eyes. It stops when we change the culture. And I'm not going to lie to you and say that happens overnight. But here's what we're doing. Every stop in question now requires detailed documentation. Officers have to articulate specific, observable factors that justify the stop. Matching a description isn't enough anymore. They need to describe exactly what matched and why. A younger man called out, "But who reviews those reports? Other cops? They'll just protect each other." That's why we created the Civilian Review Board, David responded. Real community members with real authority to examine complaints and make recommendations. They have access to body camera footage, reports, everything, and their findings are made public. What about the officers who don't like these changes? Someone else asked. What about the ones who think you're being too hard on them? David paused, choosing his words carefully. There are officers who aren't happy, who think I'm undermining them, making their jobs harder. And you know what? I am making their jobs harder, if their job was based on assumptions and shortcuts. But for officers who want to do this work right, who want to build trust with the community, these changes make their jobs easier, because when people trust you, they cooperate. They share information. They see you as helpers, not threats. After the meeting, David stood in the parking lot talking with residents who'd waited to speak with him privately. A middle-aged man approached, hesitant. Chief, I wanted to tell you something. My son is an officer in your department. When you first implemented these changes, he came home angry every day, thought you were making them all look bad. But last week something happened. What was that? David asked. He responded to a domestic dispute call, normally tense situation. but the family knew him. They'd seen him at the community barbecue your department hosted. They trusted him, and because of that trust, they let him help. Nobody got arrested, nobody got hurt, and the situation was resolved. He came home that night and said, "Dad, I think the chief might be right." That's what changed. David felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you for telling me that. Tell your son I said thank you too, for giving this a chance." The man nodded and walked away, leaving David alone under the streetlights. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. One caught his attention. It was from Officer Chen. "Chief, made my first solo traffic stop today. Followed all the new protocols. Driver was cooperative and actually thanked me for being respectful. Felt good. Thought you'd want to know." David smiled and typed back, "Proud of you, Officer Chen. That's how it's supposed to work." Back at the station the next morning, David gathered his command staff for their weekly meeting. Reynolds, Morrison, and the other captains and lieutenants filled the conference room. "Where are we on the bias training?" David asked. Captain Morrison pulled up a spreadsheet on the screen. 78% of the department has completed the initial training. The remaining 22% are scheduled for next month. We've also started the advanced training for supervisors. Feedback? Morrison hesitated. Mixed. Some officers report it's eye-opening. Others think it's a waste of time. But everyone's completing it, and that's what matters. It's not just about completion, David corrected. It's about impact. Are we seeing changes in behavior? In stops, in complaints? Reynolds spoke up. Complaints are actually up, but that's because we made the process easier and more accessible. We have an online portal now, multiple languages, and we reach out to people after every police interaction to ask about their experience. But the nature of complaints has changed. We're seeing fewer allegations of excessive force and more about response times or communication. That's progress, David said. People complaining about response times means they see us as a service they can critique, not an occupying force they have to fear. There's something else, Reynolds added. Remember the North Side neighborhood that refused to cooperate with us on that gang investigation last year? They've reached out, said they want to talk. They have information they're willing to share now. David felt a surge of hope. Set up a meeting. I'll attend personally. After the meeting, David took a walk through the station. He made it a point to do this several times a week, stopping to talk with officers, clerks, dispatchers, listening to their concerns, showing them he was accessible. In the break room, he found 3 officers having coffee. They stood when he entered. Sit, David said, waving them down. Mind if I join you? They exchanged glances but nodded. David poured himself a cup and sat down. How's everything going? He asked. One officer, a veteran named O'Connor, spoke up. Honestly, Chief, it's an adjustment. The body cameras, the documentation, the community events. Some days I feel like I'm filling out more paperwork than actual police work. I hear you, David said, and I know it feels like bureaucracy. But let me ask you something. Have you had any interactions lately where the body camera helped you? Where the documentation protected you? O'Connor thought for a moment. Actually, yeah. Last week, Guy claimed I was aggressive during a stop. Said I grabbed him, pushed him around. But the body cam showed the whole thing. I was professional the entire time. Without that footage, it would have been my word against his. Exactly, David said. These tools protect good officers as much as they hold bad officers accountable. Maybe even more. Another officer, younger, named Williams, leaned forward. Chief, can I ask you something? About that day at the coffee shop. How did you stay so calm? If that was me, I think I would have lost it. David considered the question. You know what went through my mind? I thought about every traffic stop I've ever made. Every time I approached someone, how I treated them, what assumptions I might have made. And I thought about my kids who are around your age. I thought about them being in that situation. That's what kept me calm. Because I knew that losing my temper, escalating the situation, wouldn't help anything. It would just confirm whatever biases were already in play. Do you think about it a lot? Williams asked. That day? Every single day, David admitted. Sometimes at night when I can't sleep, I play it back. I think about what I could have said differently, how I could have handled it better. But then I remind myself that I wasn't the one who needed to handle it better. I was just trying to buy coffee. The room fell quiet. O'Connor finally spoke. For what it's worth, Chief, a lot of us are glad you're here. What happened to you shouldn't have happened. And if you can use your position to make sure it doesn't happen to others, then maybe something good comes from it. David stood, nodding his thanks. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. And I can't do it without officers like you, the ones willing to adapt, to question, to be better. Thank you. That weekend, David attended the annual police and community barbecue at Riverside Park. It had been a small, poorly attended event in previous years, but this time, hundreds of people showed up. Families grilled food alongside officers. Kids played basketball with cops. People laughed and talked and shared stories. David stood at a picnic table, flipping burgers, when he noticed someone approaching. It was the teenager who'd recorded the coffee shop incident on his phone, the one whose video had gone viral. Chief Thompson, the young man said nervously. I don't know if you remember me. I remember, David said, extending his hand. You recorded what happened. Thank you for that. I've been watching what you've been doing, the teenager said. The changes, the meetings, all of it. My friends and I were starting to see police differently. Like, we're still cautious, but we're not automatically afraid anymore. That's because of you. It's not just because of me, David said. It's because of good officers who are always trying to do right, and because of people like you who hold us accountable. Both are necessary. The young man smiled. My mom wants to meet you. She's over there watching. She's been nervous to come over. Well, let's go say hello, David said, setting down his spatula. As the sun set over the park, David looked around at the scene. Officers and civilians eating together, talking together, laughing together. It wasn't perfect. There were still people who wouldn't come, who didn't trust, who'd been hurt too deeply by the system. But it was a start. His phone buzzed. A text from Angela. Saw the photos from the barbecue. Look at you, changing the world one burger at a time. Love you. David smiled and typed back. One burger, one conversation, one decision at a time. See you soon. Later that night, at home in his study, David worked on a speech he was giving at the State Police Chiefs Conference next month. Other departments were watching what he was doing, some with interest, some with skepticism. He wanted to share what he'd learned, both from his experience and from the work that followed. He typed, real change doesn't come from policies alone. It comes from honestly examining ourselves, our biases, our assumptions. It comes from being willing to admit when we're wrong and commit to doing better. It comes from seeing every person we encounter as a human being first, not a suspect, not a statistic, not a threat. His daughter knocked on the door. Dad, you're still working? Just finishing up, David said. What's up? She sat on the edge of his desk. I was telling my friends about what happened to you, about the coffee shop, and they were surprised that you didn't, fire the guy immediately or go on some revenge campaign. Would that have helped? David asked. I don't know. But it would have felt satisfying, right? David shook his head. Satisfaction isn't the goal, change is. And real change takes time, patience, and a lot of uncomfortable work. If I just fired Hutchins and called it done, nothing would have actually changed. The next officer with the same mindset would have done the same thing. But if I can change the system, the training, the culture, then maybe we prevent the next incident. You really think it's working? She asked. David thought about the town hall meetings, the reduced complaints, the North Side neighborhood reaching out, the teenager at the barbecue, Officer Chen's message, the community trust slowly rebuilding. I think it's starting to, he said. It's not perfect and it never will be, but it's better than it was 3 months ago.